politics is that truth is rarely a politician's objective. Election and power are. Good evening and welcome. Nice to have you back in our studios at 9:30 p.m. live right here from Stein Studios in Ratmalana. We had a slight difficulty in connecting with our studios in the Parliament to bring you this telecast 9:30 sharp. However, we are now back on track and we have three interesting guests in our studios this evening as well to talk about Sri Lanka's present political climate with an emphasis on election. Let me introduce our guest to you this evening. Joining us tonight on the show is Mr. Kesaralal Gunasekara, United People's Freedom Alliance, Devila Mount Municipal Councillor. Nice to have you on board, Mr. Gunasekara. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. Athula Samarakone, Lecturer, Open University of Colombo. Also joining us tonight on the show is Mr. Lassel De Silva, former Secretary Presifac of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry to look into serious acts of fraud, corruption and abuse of power, state resources and privileges. Let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Athula Samarakone, Lecturer, Open University of Colombo. Dr. Samarakone, what we saw recently in Parliament with regard to the no-confidence motion that was brought forward by the Janata Vimukti Peramunda, many people expected this to somewhat have a good impact in the Parliament, in society, to show some sort of a strength for the opposition. However, it turned out to be different. The no-confidence motion became somewhat a confidence of motion for the government of Sri Lanka, the government in power, led by the United National Party. What was the reason behind this? If the JP knew that they will be defeated with the no-confidence motion, why did they in the first place bring the no-confidence motion to the Parliament?
Well, I think the reasons are very clear, that the people have lost their faith in this government. So that is very much clear after nearly 5 years in power. The current government, which was called the good governance regime, has clearly lost their confidence among people. You know, when a government is first elected, so that shows that that government has enough confidence among people. Just after the government is elected, it has much confidence. But what happens is, generally, no government in the world is able to preserve that confidence forever, for at least during their tenure. So what happened to this good governance regime, which is called a hybrid government, the UNF plus SLFP government, actually it put forward a very ambitious program, and which was supported by, unprecedentedly, many of the political civil society elements of this country, including the JVP and many other civil society organizations. This ambitious project. But soon after, we saw that the regime which came into power came into power in an unprecedented for them by the people. So then the government, basically, I mean, particularly the UNP, the UNF, was taking on their own path, and the people and the rest of the others who elected this government began to sort of criticize the government, and there was a lot of arguments about the direction the government, about the path the government was taking in the country, because first of all, the people expected this government to at least to bring those who had violated the laws of this country to the book. But the government failed to do that. On the other hand, the people expected the government to correct the wrong economic policies which the previous government had undertaken, but this government...
I'm talking in particular about the no-confidence motion.
Of course.
The Janata Vimukti Peramunda's action in Parliament recently, didn't this show political immaturity to bring something like a no confidence motion, knowing very well that this will be defeated?
So one can argue in many ways, but the reality is that the government has lost the faith among the people. If you read the newspapers few days ago, Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit has earnestly asked the government to resign, because why? This Easter Sunday attack itself is evidence to the lack of integrity in the government and the lack of awareness of the government of the way the country should be governed, right? The government has no idea about national security. The government has no idea about the economic policies. Government doesn't know about the agreements that it signed with the foreign countries. So these reasons have ultimately culminated in the position that government is no government. This is not a government at all, because the government.
When you look at the numbers that
numbers are clear, because we know that the UNP plus the TNA can, anytime win any motion in Parliament.
But my question to you is about the numbers that came to support the no confidence motion to the streets, which was the procession that was organized by the JVP. In Kalutara, you saw somewhat of good numbers, but all the other protest march that did culminate or did start or did end didn't see the numbers that require. And doesn't this mean that the people have even or going to sideline the Janata Vimukti Peramuna at the next election that will be held in Sri Lanka? May it be a presidential election, may it be a local government election, or may it be a general election?
So one can actually have sort of hypothetical arguments about the faith that the people have in Janata Vimukti Peramuna, but I think Janata Vimukti Peramuna is a kind of force which actually is not represented adequately in Parliament and in other places. But the power that it can generate is enormous, and that can't be beaten by other parties. So that is very clear, because Janata Vimukti Peramuna, though I am not a party member and I am just a sympathizer of this party, but I see it has a clear-cut policy. It has a clear policy, and it is being supported by, at the moment, a large number of intellectuals of this country. You know, recently they created this National Intellectuals Organization, which is one of the largest group of intellectuals of this country. Why the educated and the intellectuals are behind this this party? Because all other parties, I would say, all other parties have lost their credibility. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Atul Samarkand, lecturer, Open University of Colombo. I now move my attention to Mr. Lasil De Silva, former secretary, PRESIFAC. PRESIFAC stands for the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into serious acts of fraud, corruption and abuse of power, state resources and privileges. Mr. De Silva, you served in the PRESIFAC as secretary for nearly 1 year. Isn't it sad that PRESIFAC itself as an organization, as an entity, has not been able to bring those individuals who were corrupt, the criminals, those who misuse power, to book, even after it being appointed in the year 2015? We're talking about 2019 now, just a couple of months away from a presidential election. Isn't it sad that none of the organizations that were established to protect good governance in the country have not yielded results at the end of the day?
I agree with you. It's very sad, because now this was a promise given by the Yahapalana government, the good governance team, saying that they will stop corruption and they will totally restore, systems, all that in day-to-day governance. And having given that assurance during the elections, this commission was established in March 2015. And I must tell you, it is very sad, because the commission, you will agree, had done their duties, in the sense they have submitted several reports and all that, right? Now, to start with, when the commission was entrusted with a wide mandate, I must say, we were able to, within a very short period, there was a history in this country that usually it is only the sprats who will be taken up and eventually be dealt with. In our case, we started, changing the culture that had prevailed in this country. And I must tell you, there are allegations against the whole lot in the previous regime. And that was one reason why they gave an promise, in the sense in their election manifesto. They had listed a number of things, in their agenda. Say, I believe having made all those promises, with regard to corruption, as you very rightly said, they really gave, it was one of the priority issues, and they were intending to sort all that out according to what we were told, even based on the terms of reference in the commission. Now, I must tell you, within 1 year, basically, now having started in March 2015, by 2016 March, we had sent the message to the public sector. I think it may be pertinent to mention, I always say when I have to mention, when I'm questioned about this situation, really the Prime Minister made an announcement in the media. All these media institutions carried that news item. He said, there is a problem now, the public sector is crumpling down. And if that is the case, he will have to rectify the situation, because public officers should not be taken before commissions. Actually, MTV made inquiries, I think it's there in the web, asked me, is it a media show, and what are you doing, and nothing is virtually happening. I said, it is all being done. For that matter, unless we have the support of the government, there will not be an outcome.
Yeah, but the problem is, Mr. Silva, let's take a look at the press fact per se. On January 3rd, 2018, it gave a report to President Maithripala Sirisena, which consisted of 1,135 pages with. Despite all this, you had the president appointing another committee to look into the Sri Lankan Airlines fraud in the past regime and even this regime. We are not completing one aspect of the problem, but we are trying to complete or begin new processes without looking at the core issue that all this.
Yeah. Give promise. They don't fulfill the promises, and they. Since 1977, I would say things have been going on the wrong track. That they had established, presidency that they had established in 1978, made the parliament simply a rubber stamp. I personally believe there should be a situation where, like in UK, our mother parliament, how they operate all that. Unfortunate situation in this country, there is no such opposition, and even the government, you asked me basically, say, what really has happened. They don't allow, they don't permit, or they don't, even after they publish the reports, right? That is beyond the functions and duties of the commissions, right? The president and the Prime Minister, all of them are responsible to enforce the law, basically take it up with the Attorney General, the Chief Justice and all that, and deal with them. Now imagine, take the bond issue, right? Now, when we were in the commission, I took the matter up with the present president, right? Because we were given a mandate to go into the investigations with regard to from the period 2005 to 2010. Now, this bond issue came up in 2015, February 27th, if I remember right? So, I mean, 2015 March or so, I went and told the president, extend our terms of reference to cover even the present government. My feeling was they did not extend the period because they probably wanted to keep the Yahapalana government going. And you asked me about this Sri Lankan, right? Actually, even in the previous government, it's a massive report. They had lost billions. And if I remember right, from 1978, since they started Lanka, right, continuously there had been losses running into billions. And there was a report published in 1987 that was again another presidential commission, right? They had said that the board of directors had felt or acted as if it was their own private property. So naturally, with all those reports, recommending legal action from 70s onwards up to now, no one has to take an action.
Mr. Very quickly, tell me, you said about you all took efforts to bring the big fish into the net, but still the big fish are at large.
Definitely, because for the first time, I must very frankly tell you, because, country must know. Now, the big fishers include even the former president, everybody, every one of them. There are a number of ministers, everybody. Now, people ask, it has come back, it has boomeranged on the present government because they used all those slogans to come into power. Having come into power, having blocked all that, now there's a story that all these were just media, shows, and there was nothing beyond, and they can't be dealt with. Yeah. And I like to say that the commission did their part. They have found everybody almost. They could be taken to court and they could be dealt with, right? Unfortunate situation is it was obvious, right? Ultimately, it ended up. Now, having thrown out.
I will get back to you in the next rounds as we progress to discuss more about the Presifac report and the efforts that were undertaken by you when you were the secretary of Presifac. But I want to quickly move to Mr. Kesalalal Gunasekara, UPFA, Deval Mount Lavinia Municipal Councillor. Mr. Gunasekara, Mr. De Silva used the word boomerang. Do you think that this government has got caught in its own words or got trapped in this good governance structure and not knowing what to do now, because most of the people who are within the government are corrupt? Or is this, I will ask you very simply, is this the worst lot that you've seen in Parliament as far as the entire history of the Sri Lankan Parliament is concerned?
Well, it's not a difficult question to answer, but I must tell you, whether this government has fallen into a trap, yes. I mean, they promised something that they would deliver, but they have not delivered. In that context, they have fallen into a trap. But from the beginning, I felt that they fought an election, the presidential election, on a clear promise, bringing so many people to justice, but that could not be worked because the establishment that they formed thereafter, after the presidential election till August, was a joint operation between the SLP and the UMP. So if there were allegations against somebody, either it has to be SLP or UMP, one of the two. So they got into a fix at the beginning itself. And thereafter, still they could move forward. You have an establishment, you have an operation, you have a commission sitting. If you're found guilty, you proceed with legal action and bring them to book. But that they did not do. I don't think they wanted to do it. Because I still feel that these commissions must be accompanied by decisions that no sooner the report is put out, within a matter of period, they have to be put forward to the to the Attorney General's department to file action. That's the only way. Plus, if there are politicians or sitting members of parliament or whoever it is, temporarily civic disability.
So you say that you do agree with Mr. De Silva when he says
Yeah.
that this is all a farce, a media gimmick to
I
gain
know.
some popularity.
I don't think it's correct for me to use that term, but it appears to be so. Because, I mean, there were 101, more than 101 cases which could have been established. Surely, there has to be something wrong. You have to understand, in this country, if you bring in a presidential commission, it has to be accompanied at the same time with procedures as to how you deal with the report of the commission. What is the period where you file action? Until such time, political bigwigs, if they are involved, temporary civic disability. Those are things that you have to do. Otherwise, you can never put this right. Because it will be the same. I mean, if it is not SLAP, it is the UNP, or both together. Where are we going? We are not getting anywhere. That's why, in the present day context, everybody is saying, look here, both these parties have messed up. Why do you think everybody is saying that? Because it is true.
Who is
It
the
is-
alternative, Mr. Gunasekara? I
Pardon?
mean, what is the alternative party that the people can look up to
No, it
at the
is-
future election?
It is a responsibility of the two major parties to ensure that they bring in quality people. It is a responsibility, leadership, that has to bring in good people into governance. If they don't bring in people to governance, good people into governance, you fail. If they go after people who can bring in votes, you still fail. Huh? That is what has happened to both parties. They try to bring in people who can bring in votes. I understand to some degree you need votes. But at the same time, what about the people who are there, who can support any regime with integrity?
But that depends on the people, isn't it, Mr. Gunasekara? Why? Let's take you for an example. You contested your electorate at the last election and you lost. And then you were brought in by the national list. So where is the quality of people if the people decide they don't want them, but they want another alternative person who probably will represent them better?
No, the question is not that. The question is not. The question is, are we bringing enough people into the fray? Are we putting in enough people into the fray? I mean, say you put in 150 people, you bring 10 good people, is not going to work. You need at least 100 people, good people. Bring them in. Then you have a majority of good people coming in.
So from the 225 now in Parliament, how many people are good and how many people are bad?
Why? That's if privately I would tell you. It's not correct for me. It's not ethical of me.
I want to open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate left is Deshan. On to my far left is Stephanie. Let's start off with Deshan.
Thank you, Samir. I think I want to head straight into it and first go to Dr. Samarkon. Dr. Samarkon, the no confidence motion was something that was brought up by Shamir in his initial line of questioning. There was an allegation that at the time there was a no confidence motion presented against Minister Rishad Badiuddin. One where members of the government itself came forward openly and stated that they would vote in favor of. Do you think that the JVP, as with the allegations, brought in the no confidence motion against the government to kind of soften the blow, or do you think they meant it genuinely?
I think politics in general is politics actually. There is nothing about genuineness or nothing about truth in politics. Right? Politics is politics. Politics is a game. It's a struggle for power. So that is how we teach students, right? So, but it is how it happens as well. So these parties, once they are in parliament, so they have to project their power. Ne? So JVP with 6 members in parliament, so it's a minor party, but it also tries to do big things. So what it tried to do is topple the government. So it could just garner 95 votes or something like that.
So to clarify, genuine or politics?
I think politically genuine, right? Politically genuine, because politics is politics, I believe. So, but the thing is, it represented something. It signified something. So JVP's act signified or represented the voice of the majority of the people in the country at the moment, including Malcolm Ranjit and many other clergies, intellectuals. So those who argue that this government is responsible for many things. So as my learned colleagues just spoke about the corruption, amount of the corruption that this government has done and previous government had committed. So there is no justice for that. So why the good governance regime was brought into power for a particular reason. But this government has forgotten that, has ignored that their job, and so it is up to the people to decide now. So JVP as a small party in this country, I don't say that JVP's policies maybe they are not proper policies, the most perfect policies, or they may not be respected by the larger majority of the country, but still the JVP's one larger space. I would say JVP provides a very good space for many good people to get in and raise their voice at the moment. So this space is blocked by other parties. If you look at the UNP doesn't allow the good people to voice their sentiments. The SLFP or SLPP are only open for the corrupt people. So this is a fact actually, because if you look at the type of people they field in elections, actually majority are corrupt people, right?
Mr. Gunasekara, you're from the SLFP faction. Are you corrupt?
No.
That is for somebody else to decide, not Mr.
People like Mr. Kesarlal Gunasekara are, gentlemen, and they are not corrupt. But that is an exception, I would say.
But
right?
of course. But what I want to know is interesting remarks about whether certain things are genuine, about which factions are corrupt. Now it's a bit hard. It's a bit of I would say murky waters in terms of where politicians and political parties lie in terms of the spectrum of clean and not so clean. I want to ask you, you were a former parliamentarian, you are a member of the UPFA, and you are more aware of the UPFA's inner workings than all of us. Do you think that the no confidence motion that was brought against the government was a facade? And if it was a facade, why, or even if it wasn't, why did the UPFA behave in parliament the way it did in terms of voting?
I think, in fairness, I must say, I feel that it was a genuine effort. Mm-hmm. I feel it was a genuine effort. You have to give their due place in that. But as to why it failed, to me, of course, right from the beginning, I realized that it is not that easy, because if the part of the UPFA is going to be silent or vote in favor, the numbers would dwindle as a result, and still the no confidence motion would lose. So in that context, I felt that maybe their effort was not really to topple the administration, but to bring to light so many issues that needed attention. That could have been the reason. But with regard to the minister, that was different. The own UNP members were willing to support that. That is why they didn't want to bring it. That's the reason.
But why I ask you this is because when those no confidence motions were submitted to the House, were presented to the House initially, the leader of the House, Lakshman Kiriyalla, came out and said they have to take the no confidence motion on the government first, because it is a no confidence motion on the government as opposed to a minister.
Correct.
And questions were raised, why are these no confidence motions not being considered in chronological order? Is there an ulterior motive behind the JVP bringing this no confidence motion? Because the allegation at least, that the JVP has been working in the interests of the government has been a long-standing one.
I think it's an allegation only. I don't think there is anything more to it. It's only an allegation. I must be fair by them. Yeah, the way they act, I don't think you could cast allegations. I don't think it's fair by them. But the question of no confidence motion being presented and it being taken up in a chronological order, no, there is no procedure of that nature. The party leaders will have to decide which one they are going to take first. The party
Absolutely.
leaders can decide on that.
I think I want to move to Mr. De Silva. Mr. De Silva, politics is an interesting game. You yourself, you're not a politician, but you've had the opportunity of working with politicians within politics for a long amount of time, a long period of time. Sri Lanka is at a crossroads, and I know we say this every time there is an election, but we're at a crossroads unlike ever before this time around, and there is a feeling of anxiety as much as there is expectation as we head into what is bound to be another national election. Do you think the people are being used as pawns in a political game, or do you think there is at least some hope of someone genuine left in the halls of our hallowed parliament?
Yeah, very right, correctly. I think Sri Lanka is at crossroads, because it is so very unfortunate. As you said, I don't know whether politics, it should not be the way politics should be, because now there are political parties in other countries also. Now take, for instance, countries like Singapore, countries like, say, England, USA, various other places, right? Now, political parties are there, yes, to grab power. But why do they grab power? To do something beneficial to the country. And here, they want to grab power, and politics for them is to remain in power, make money, reinvest all that, and get elected, by hook or crook, stick on, hang on, and then make more money. Unfortunate situation is they have been able to deceive even the general public by giving them various, say, like
handouts.
Yeah, which should not be the case. I must tell you, I must take you back to 1931. Ours is one of the oldest, no, not one of the oldest democracies. This is the oldest democracy in Asia, this part of Asia, right? And we got voting rights in 1931. And in UK, they gave voting rights in 1918. Actually, even India is a lot junior to us when you consider them as a democracy, right? But unfortunate situation is, now, you have, now, like in UK, right? They have systems. Now, if I may quote you, in 1994, they also had a similar situation where there were reports, even in the media, various TV channels, the media took up the position. That was during Tony Blair, if I remember right. Tony Blair. Or John Major, if I remember right? John Major's period, then they introduced a commission called Nolan Commission, because they wanted to go into the reasons as to why, corruption, inefficiency, all that was spreading in the public sector too. Then there was this report. Basically, it recommended, it was a very good report, I must say, and they prescribed 10 good qualities, in the sense all public servants, all public officials, all elected bodies must have all those, if I remember right. Just luckily I noted it down when I came. Honesty, impartiality, openness, accountability, accuracy, fairness, integrity, transparency, objectivity, reliability. And it had said every government needs credibility, right? In modern times, elected governments are accountable to parliament. Integrity is the common thread. Transparency and value for money are the essential results. It is so very unfortunate. In our case, we don't observe any of these things. The biggest problem is leaders must set the example. If the leaders set the example, I think the others would also definitely follow. My biggest grouse is, unfortunately, for a long period of time, say all these who have been elected over and over again, when you are elected too long and when you permit the same lot to continue, right, it proves that they, it's like SLFP goes out, the other party comes in, and they protect the SLFP in order to be safe, and UNP will come back, UNP will protect the SLFP. So naturally this has been going on for a long period of time. It is unfortunate people for the last couple of years have lost not only time, money. Now ultimately this has become one of the poorest countries in the whole world when compared to what we enjoyed in 1948. We were a country, our per capita income was just below Japan, right? We were compared to Malaysia, almost the same. How did all that ultimately come down? It is all because our rulers don't have principles. Now I remember another one. During, again, Tony Blair, I remember Robin Cook, the state secretary, on an issue, withdrew, resigned, right? Now in our country there may be all that. Now see, again in Australia, the Minister of Health, right, for $3,000, there was an accusation that she had flown to Gold Coast having used government funds to purchase a property. That was taken up. Ultimately, she stepped down. Here,
so this is, I think on that note, Stephanie also has a question.
Yes, my question should be directed to you, Mr. De Silva, since you are on the same lines of corruption and we are also talking about corruption.
Please.
In the current context of the upcoming presidential elections, the corruption narrative was heavily used by the current government when they were fielding their main candidate for the previous presidential election, right? So my question to you is, will this backfire on them? And when I say backfire, I mean, will the current potential candidates for the upcoming presidential election hold the government accountable for not having adequate evidence to prove all these big fishes, as you said, wrong? To bring them to the book, to bring them to justice? Will they hold them accountable for not having adequate evidence to bring any of them or putting them behind bars?
One actually blanket statement I could make here, all the allegations made against most of the politicians have been proved, in the sense, to a great extent, the reports had directed a direct finger. Actually, they can't just, put them under the carpet. So very unfortunate they have done that. But my problem is, let me turn it the other way about. I don't think the country, although we were yesterday in Vallavaya, had a meeting with regard to, some arrangements going to be done for the next presidential elections, parliamentary elections, right? The country, even in places like Vallavaya, they want to reject the present 225 because they have not dealt with any of the politicians who have been named or who have been directly pointed a finger that they have been corrupt.
Yes, but what was the next step after Presifac? Since it ended, it was terminated like in 2018. What was the next step the government had to bring these people to book, to make them accountable for what they did?
The next step should be, they should not keep all those reports in their cupboards, right? They should forward all that to the Attorney General and take meaningful steps. What is really lacking at the moment, they lack the willpower to deal with the corrupt.
So
right?
why isn't the opposition bringing this up? If that is that easy, bringing it to the AGS department.
It's against opposition.
If it's so simple, as you say, why hasn't that been done yet?
I don't see there is an opposition in the present in the parliamentary system during the last couple of years, because they have been changing sides, whether they could be sold or they could be bought. I don't know. All that everybody knows. Unfortunate situation is people have such a lot of problems because there's no opposition. The job done that needs to be, the job of the opposition needs to be to deal with, whatever the corrections that needs to be done.
I'm not talking about the main opposition. Anything other than the ruling party can be an opposition, right? Anyone
No,
who's opposing.
Now see, simply to describe the opposition, right? Can you give me anything? Because now see, even with regard to the no confidence motion, right? I mean, they were jointly supporting. Now, do they have any, I don't want to name people or anything like that, right? There are direct allegations against, with regard to investigations we made, there was 15 billion lost to the government with regard to one of the ministers who has now walked out, or at least given up ministerial posts, right? Now, can anyone protect anyone who is corrupt in parliament? That's what I said. Robin Cook withdrew on principle, saying, I don't agree with this. You have to agree.
But do we have any of those people currently
I don't think anyone,
in parliament?
in parliament.
To be very fair, Tilak Marapana resigned from his portfolio when the avant-garde case and his name was embroiled in the case.
Okay, but he came back.
He
came back.
But he came back. But then we saw Ravi Karunanak
It's useless resigning if you're coming back.
resigning from his portfolio as the minister.
Shami,
of
can I
Finance.
intervene here? I mean,
Yeah.
when Mr. Silva says that anyone in parliament, so there are no, I mean, can we take JVP into this, right? Because
Even
JVP is not. Can you
JVP
explain that? Right.
even the JVP is responsible because
But that's right.
So that means everyone in the
Dawson.
country is responsible because people have elected these people, members. So we all are responsible.
no, the whole problem is a
So
parliamentarian.
this argument, I think, this is something that is actually being promoted at the moment. This public opinion that these people like Taiwan, many people, I think now, many people argue that entire parliament is responsible.
Have nothing personal.
No, I understand, but this is a wrong perception that we are sort of, I mean, projecting to the society
But
that when we say entire parliament and all the people, so there, where do we find the politician? We have to import politicians from other countries and then rule the country.
Then now Plato had said.
I don't agree with this. Actually, this is unethical to speak like that.
No, but Dr. Samarkand, if you take a look at the JVP as a whole, you now see that several defeated.
At least they were
defeated
not in power and
parliamentarians-
they have not stolen something from the government.
But defeated parliamentarians have come back through the national list in the JVP at present as we speak. So these are people rejected by the people at an election, but because of the parliament system is such, they come from the back door.
See,
through the
I
national
think
list.
we know who the real culprits are, Shami, right? But our media, intellectuals, what they try to hide, actually. We cannot hide anything now. The entire country is now corrupt and we feel the smell line, right? Everything is rotten
No,
now.
but the
right?
JP can't say that they are very clean and there is no problem within the party itself. There has been many instances in which there has been cases against Janata Vimukti Peramuna as well.
So
over the last
if
few
you want to check
years,
the purity
Dr.
of any person, I think no one is perfect. But
Yeah.
if you look at the amount of corruption that these major parties have committed, so we cannot accuse them. Now, right now, Mr. Silva said one member of parliament has stolen 15 billion, right? 15 billion. Can you imagine?
But if you really look at the numbers,
this
the
amount of
problem
money.
is-
JP is, according to the data, JP is one
No.
of the richest political parties in Sri Lanka.
Who says that? I don't think.
This is what the data is saying, based on.
Shamir, you bring these silly arguments all the time. I really don't like
No,
it.
last time I brought this argument very correctly. I told you that Janata Vimukti Peramuna based
Are
on
you
Transparency
telling the
International-
people that JVP is the richest party? I don't think
based
people
on
will believe that.
based on the data
If you
issued
say
by
that,
Transparency
UNPO
International, it very clearly says that Janata Vimukti Peramuna is one of the richest parties in Sri Lanka. Probably other parties have not declared their assets to the public, but based
Yeah,
on the
that's-
declarations of assets of the political parties, JP is one of the richest political parties in Sri Lanka at present, Dr. Samarkand. I want to
Richest
go for a short-
JVP is rich, I would say. JVP is rich in many terms. JVP is rich with money maybe that people have donated, and JVP is rich at least with discipline. So they are one of the most disciplined parties in this country. So I'm not afraid to tell that.
In one way, I'm sorry to barge in, actually all the parliamentarians in parliament must remember they have a duty to democratize the democracy,
Of course.
which is not democratic now, right?
Of course.
I don't think even the JVP is doing their maximum to democratize the system, because there are systems, there are things. Now, if you go into the history, right, there are so many reports that JVP had also published now with regard to the bond scam, right? Now, the present chairman published a report. In my view, if I was in parliament, I would not have stayed, kept quiet, because I know JVP, I don't want to accuse them in that way, right? Now, having published a report, they have a strong, group of people. Why are they, so very relaxed when it comes to their own report? And why do something, go to courts and take it up and fight it out. Why can't they do that?
So do you
Thank you
think
very much,
that our
gentlemen.
courts will...
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We need to go for a short commercial break, but I want to prove a point to Dr. Atul Samarkand. Based on the Daily News article which was published on the 4th of April 2017, it very clearly says, Dr. Samarkand, because you are not aware, I want to bring this to your light. Financial records of 8 political parties released by the Elections Commissioner through the RTI request put forward by Transparency International Sri Lanka has shown the Janata Vimukti Peramuna to be the most financially secure and asset-rich party among the main political parties.
Yeah, what
in
does
Sri
that
Lanka.
mean actually?
So
What
I
is
just
the
want to,
meaning of this?
I just want to bring that to your light because you are not aware of the facts.
I'm very much aware
Right,
of that.
so
But
that is not a silly argument that was brought forward by Dr. Samarkand for information. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll speak more about Sri Lanka's current political climate and more. That's coming up after this short commercial break. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I want to take my attention towards Mr. Lasil de Silva, former Secretary, Presidential Commission of Inquiry into assets, fraud, corruption and abuse of power, state resources and privileges. Mr. de Silva, we're talking about a presidential election now, and you mentioned in your opening statement that even the former president and several big fish like state ministers within the government previously are embroiled with a lot of corruption allegations. My question to you is very simple. We're now talking about Gotabaya Rajapaksa as a presidential candidate for the Sri Lanka Pojana Peramuna. In your opinion, do you think, does he fall into any of these categories? Serious acts of fraud, corruption, abuse of power, state resources and privileges. Has he violated any of this?
To be frank, yes, because I have nothing against anybody. Now, with regard to funds that they have invested on a family memorial, whatever construction they had done, right?
The D.A. Rajapaksa Memorial Statue.
Memorial, all that is government's funds. Unfortunate situation is there are so many, starting from the top, Silredi, this, that and all that, right? These government funds should not be spent on that kind of things. So naturally, all of them are responsible, let me be frank. Unfortunate situation is there is nothing substantial, nothing concrete is being done by the present government too, because probably, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. That should not be the system. And even with regard to the financial government, systems and all that, there are rules, there are regulations. Really, misappropriation of funds is corruption, right? Unethical use of funds unethically or for purposes that is not prescribed, or at least, it's corruption. So naturally, there's good enough evidence against most of these, whom you had just mentioned. Unfortunate situation is people also now believe there are no allegations because they couldn't. There are allegations, but it has not been proved. So people think all this is lies, which is not the case. It is not lies.
Would it be an ideal bet to represent the Sri Lanka Pojana Peramuna at a time there is a clear alternative that the people are looking forward as far as Sri Lanka is concerned at the next presidential election?
Whether people are looking...
Am I putting you in a spot now?
No. Actually, my very sincere feeling is none of these people who have been engaged in politics, or at least who have been in positions where there is a finger pointed at with regard to corruption, right? I don't think they should be voted in, because unfortunate situation is most of them can I say it again, surrounded by people who have been corrupt. If this country has to raise its head, or at least make it safer for the next generations to come, our culture, corrupt culture, should be ended. I don't think if you, can I say, anyone from...
Yes, you may.
anyone from, say, from the existing political system, whether they have been directly in politics or whether they have been involved with various positions. I personally feel, to go a step further, this system should be changed in so many ways. Now, public service is corrupt because they appoint officers, whom they want. Now, Article 52(1) and 55(2) in the Constitution, it provides facility for the President to appoint the secretaries.
I want to ask you a very simple question, Mr. De Silva, before we move to Mr. Gunasekara, UPFA, the Heavily Mounted Municipal Councillor. You were also in Parliament as the Director of Administration for nearly 11 years.
Yeah.
Is this the worst lot you've seen? These 225 members in Parliament?
To tell you frankly, I think, now you said that you have to send more, educated people. Unfortunate situation is, even in the present Parliament, you have educated people too. What has happened? All of them...
And they rob very well.
All of them are supporting, all of them are helping each other to continue, this situation.
Is this the worst lot?
This could be the worst lot according to what I have seen.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva, former Secretary of Press Bank.
Next lot could be worse.
I now move attention to Mr. Kesalal Gunasekara, United People's Freedom Alliance, Devil Mountain Municipal Councillor. Mr. Gunasekara, the leader of the United People's Freedom Alliance is the President.
Is there?
Is the President. The President can't say that he is not responsible for what is happening right now in Sri Lanka. Could he say so?
I don't think he can say that.
He's the head of the cabinet. He has to take responsibility, mustn't he?
He has to take responsibility.
So where does the buck stop now? Does the buck stop at the President, or does the buck stop at the Prime Minister?
But if you go to analyze it, I have a different theory altogether. But I should not elaborate on that. Because to me, the person who has to lead is the PM. Is the PM. As to whether he has led properly is a question mark. That's where everything starts.
But
I view this from a different point of view, Shamir, because if you take both personalities, the capability, the education, the experience, etc., etc., I feel the person who has to lead is the PM.
But you can't do cherry picking when you're the President, can you?
Pardon?
You can't do cherry picking from the cake when you're the President, can you?
No.
It's the entire responsibility. You either eat the cake or leave the cake aside.
I did not say that, but it is, he was selected by the people. It's the people's choice. So as to whether he's permitted to perform is a question. He can act on his own, but maybe he has not done that. He can act on his own also, but maybe he has not done that.
I'll tell you a classic example, Mr. Gunasekara. When drug kingpins were arrested, when they were put behind bars, when issues like Bharata Lakshman Premachandra's assassination came into play, when the perpetrators were put behind bars and given the death sentence, so on and so forth, the President said, "It's I who did it." But when the April 21st attack happened, there seemed to be no one to take responsibility to what happened. neither the president nor the prime minister took responsibility. Why is that? Can you then say that the president is elected by the people, but the prime minister is educated, so he has to take the lead? 256 people died, 500 people injured. Over 150 people are maimed for life. Is that the attitude?
No, I have a different view altogether. In fact, I openly said this at a meeting held very recently at the Defense Ministry. Defense Ministry. I said, look here, when it comes to the question of protecting human beings, I said your role, the role of the police and the security forces is to protect people. You don't have to go after politicians to get advice or orders to do that job. Why did I say that? Because that's their role. If I get information that there is a terrorist who's planning an attack, I don't have to take it to somebody else to take action. I take action. Thereafter I can inform the others. My job is that. Because it's the life of people. That's where we fail. I said this at an open conference at the Defense Ministry, maybe 2 weeks back. I maybe had the guts to say it.
Do you think the people have been fooled into all this? Because 17th of August 2015, when the general election was held, people thought it was fit to have a split government, a coalition government, and they did not give any party a majority. Wasn't this the biggest mistake?
No.
That Sri Lanka
I think the decision of the people is correct. They could not decide on which party, so they thought, okay, if you want to establish an administration, get together and establish an administration. But in this country, that doesn't work.
I want to take you very quickly to India. Let's take a look at the Indian political front. We saw the Congress party creating governments with coalition partners, and they did not have a say in what they did, and they did not have the control, they did not have the power. Hence, they lost 2 general elections back to back, not even gaining a sizable amount of votes to even field an opposition leader in the Indian parliament. We saw that happening, and people decided that they want to give an overwhelming majority to the BJP, and hence Prime Minister Narendra Modi has become very strong in the Indian political fora at present. So the people decided they want to give him a majority, let him lead the country, let him take the decisions, let him lead India to the next level. So isn't that what is required in Sri Lanka as well?
Maybe to some degree, but in India the question is different. It was nationalism.
And we are not patriotic enough.
I don't think it works here to that degree.
Thank you very much.
But I still feel that the presidential election is not going to be the answer. It is not going to be the answer for the woes of this country. It has to be an effort, a joint effort between all parties, a concrete agreement as to how we rule for the next 5-6 years, a clean operation, and establish
I think Mr. Would say that Sri Lanka has learned the hard way that the presidential election doesn't mean the end of governance or end of corrupt governance coming into play. It's about the will and the political will that the politicians should have in Parliament. I now move attention to Dr. Atul Samarkon, lecturer, Open University of Colombo. Dr. Samarkon, what do you think the JVP should do at the next presidential election?
It should contest.
Contest alone?
Yeah, I think as a political party, it should.
Who will they feel as a
consider
presidential candidate?
Right now, I also get reports from newspapers as an analyst, as an independent analyst, because people like me actually recently we began to think of JVP seriously because we never got the membership of this party, but through the National Intellectual Organization and other forums, we have been actually voicing our support. So that is for a genuine reason that we think that We need a better government in this country. We need better people in power. So JVP is a party actually which can give that leadership. As of now, we think that there's better people should join JVP. JVP has opened up that space for intellectuals of this country. That is a good point actually. That is a
JP did open, the JP correctly, as you say, at the 2015 elections did open for intellectuals to come into the national list, through the national list. We had people like Mr. Mayadune, who was the former Auditor General, who only sat in Parliament for one day and said, I would resign from my portfolio. And then you all had in the national list Krishmal Varnasurya, who is now being very vocal about the activities of the JP itself as a political party. So you all did have intellectuals, but you all still decided to field people who lost or who were defeated in the political battle, which was a general election.
Yes, Shamir, I agree with you there, because even at that point, I think JP should not have withdrawn from its ethical positions. So it shouldn't have brought Handunnetti into Parliament, but once Handunnetti was brought into Parliament, he did a proper job with COPE actually. So if it weren't for Mr. Handunnetti, this COPE report wouldn't have been like this, right?
What makes you think that Krishmal Varnasurya couldn't do it?
Or Mr. Mayadune for that matter.
Why do you think?
Actually, I asked Mr. Mayadune because when I brought him to the university for a lecture, I asked Mr. Mayadune why actually you resigned, whether JP pressurized you or not. He told me that he frankly resigned because he had other reasons. For his resignation, not that the JP
Let's
wanted
talk
him
about
to
the
resign.
presidential candidate of the Janata Vimukti Peramuna. Who is it going to be?
So, if you saw the news in the last few days, JP is now in the process of making an alliance, what they call the NPP, National People's Power. So I read in the
With
papers.
other parties. With other parties.
Some parties are there. I saw
Political organizations.
Mostly political organizations and some minor parties. So, but anyway, they are good people. I find.
No,
they are
I
good
want
people.
a candidate per se. I don't want to know.
They are not decided.
So
yet,
not
they
yet
say.
decided about
They
it.
have not still decided, but most probably they will field a candidate which is agreeable to all these elements.
My next
28
question to you is very simple. When the no confidence motion was being tabled in Parliament, Janata Vimukti Peramuna parallelly had a procession to suppress or to demand the government's resignation. The JP could not even get 2,000 people to the streets. We're talking about a general election which requires at least 60 million voters to say yes.
6 million.
6 million voters to say yes. So
Yeah,
a
I
party
have
who cannot
doubts
even
about
get
this number,
1,500 people to come to the streets, is it wishful thinking when I say you all are thinking
Shamir,
an elusive goal?
We can question and we can make our opinions on everything the JVP or other parties do. Actually, this is how the political parties behave. As a political scientist or one who teaches politics, one who is, one who doesn't know much about politics, I can say this is how, in my opinion, and according to other theories, this is how political parties behave. They, from time to time, they try to project their power. So JVP is also a political party. So we have to, in a way, look at this element from that angle as well. Because JVP, as a political party, it has to ensure itself that it has enough support among its own people. So I agree with you. I went to this Nugegoda rally towards the end of it, and because my house is nearby, and I went and I saw all the people clad in red shirts and red caps. So I realized they are actually real party members. Actually, in Nugegoda rally, I noticed there were about 2,000 people. Maybe your number is right. So
Not more than 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks a lot, Dr. Abdul Samakon. Lecturer, Open University of Colombo. We're talking about a 6 million vote, at least to be able to get 5,000 people to the streets for a procession makes a justifiable number, not 2,000. Anyway, that's your opinion. I leave it at that. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. Let's start off with Stephanie.
So my question is directed towards Kesala Gunasekara. So the current political scene is marred with corruption, and that's what we tend to just gather on a day-to-day basis, and especially on Face the Nation today. So it's almost like a default setting. So people are all used to it. Corrupt politician, every politician has that kind of adjective. But with that in mind, and since upcoming elections is just around the corner, presidential election is just around the corner, my question to you is, will the security concerns that are really grappling and which is on people's minds, will this kind of change the political landscape?
When you say security concerns?
Meaning, especially after the attacks. Now, since corruption has been the thing that everyone harps on about every election, so people are so used to it now, will the security concern topic, national security being under threat, change the political landscape, especially after the upcoming presidential election?
I don't agree that the national security was a threat at any time. At any time. That's my simple answer. I don't think that is going to be a topic. But the way things are going, it always boils down to one thing, you know. At that given time, what would people see or prefer? The better crook in both parties. You know, that's exactly how they would look at things.
But is
That's all that's
is
going
there a better crook?
I don't know. That's all that's going to happen, because you've got to understand that both these parties, if they ever go through democratic principles, most of these people cannot contest elections, the way I see it. Because most of them have allegations of corruption. Most of them have allegations of corruption. Amassing of wealth, it's very simple. You don't need laws to decide that. I mean, you don't need to go to courts to decide that. You go through somebody's assets, it's very clear. How did you amass? You are not done a job, you have about 300 to 400 million in your bank accounts. You can't. Very simple.
So when security concerns come into this debate during this presidential election, do you think a party would have the upper hand?
I don't think security concern is an issue. It was an issue 3 months back where everybody was taken aback.
Why not? Like, there are people who are still concerned about the country's security.
No, the concern is something else. It is not a security concern anymore.
Mr. Gunasekar, if I may, I want to move my attention to Mr.
It is not a security concern anymore. It is something else.
Mr. De Silva,
I have had several meetings after this fiasco, political meetings, etc. And what transpired is very, very
So
clear.
if it's not a security concern, the schools shouldn't have security in front of them. If it's not a security concern, then schools shouldn't be raiding every classroom.
That was a decision taken by the government at that particular juncture.
Which means there is an imminent threat of a security concern.
It does not mean that there is a security threat. It does not mean. It's a decision taken by the government which was acted upon. That's all.
Mr. De Silva, moving on, I want to ask you, when you speak about how all 225 individuals currently in Parliament are unsuitable to potentially lead this country, or they don't have the records you would ideally like to see in a person who would like to lead this country. Now, we have seen people step up to the plate. We've seen people be brave enough to come forward as individuals who are willing to contest the upcoming elections. We had the name of a leading business magnate thrown. We had Mr. Rohan Pallewatta come forward. He was on this show as well. Mr. Nagananda Kodituakku. But already, a few months before the election, even before the elections are announced, you see some of these candidates unraveling before our very eyes. There is a big issue surrounding a leading business figure who was supposedly going to contest the election. Then, with regard to Mr. Kodituakku, there is a video circulating on how he, on social media, on how he speaks against and he speaks basically against the policy of the previous government with regard to casinos, and then he has a casino set in his house. Now, do you think that if you can't play the politics that come along with having to be elected, that you will be able to do a good job once you are elected? Because we have an inherent systematic problem And without understanding the symptoms within the system, how are you going to treat them?
I think you're right, because there are certain flaws, very serious flaws in the system. I think the political culture is wrong, public sector, the culture, all that, the rules, regulations in certain ways have been modified, or at least, now let me say it this way. Like what you said, we went through certain processes with no confidence motions. Again, I remember, when Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa, there was impeachment motion, right? They couldn't push it through. Unfortunate situation is the present constitution. It has very serious flaws. I think all that will have to be considered, not replacing the whole constitution. In my view, of course, there are certain basic amendments needed, maybe 5 or 6. Once you put that whole thing, you have to now, like Montesquieu theory, keep all those institutions separately, right? Now the parliament can disregard certain things when there's an order, or at least when there's something given by the court or laws, by courts, right? Naturally, even there are a lot of problems. Now we discussed about the security situations, right? There can be such security flaws. Now ultimately the Secretary to the Defense and the IGP have been dealt with, but I personally feel I'm really sorry, the whole system has collapsed. Actually, the public servants also can't do their job independently. I remember even in a place like Parliament, right, when I did something correct, actually one of the then speakers wanted us to give increments and something irregular, and ultimately what happened, right? I was sent on compulsory, but later I was also told, Lasil, don't be stubborn, come, say sorry. And I said, no, I'm not prepared to say sorry, I will even stay at home. Fortunately for me, I was able to come back, because there was a situation, they couldn't hold it against me. Now my thinking is public sector needs to be rectified by giving them strength so that they can independently carry out their jobs. There should not be political interferences at all. The whole problem is from 1978 up to now, utterly politicized public sector. Once you really depoliticize the system, they brought in commissions, right, to
address the issue.
It was very unfortunate. There was a period, even the commissions were not approved. Now, the best example at the moment, right? This government promised setting up the procurement commission, right? These commissions are totally defunct. They are there, money is being wasted. If you have the system in place, the procurement commission will definitely go into all those tenders and all that. I believe if there should be set up new lawmakers, who will know how to make laws and how to deal with the corrupt politicians, etc., even in the past. Because I remember in 1978, when the then UNP government was elected to power, for extending the parliament for 2 years, Mrs. Bandaranaike's civic rights were removed, right? There is a situation now, even when the provincial councils, I don't agree that there should be provincial councils. I personally feel devolution of power should take place even more meaningfully, right? Now those systems need to be corrected, but the problem is when the system needs elections, you can't
postpone.
You just can't postpone, right? Naturally there'll be situation, there'll be new leadership who should take up, who will understand all these complications and probably deal with even the present set of politicians who are responsible not to hold elections, all that, right? So naturally, like this Professor Giddens had said, the biggest problem in these countries, most of the politicians don't understand how to democratize the democracies. What we need to do is to democratize the country. If you democratize the country, I think all what we want could be done. I think there will be a better future for our children and grandchildren.
Very quickly, Dr. Atul Samarkand, before we close the fourth round, where is the Janata Vimukti Peramuna standing in this entire equation? We're speaking about the United People's Freedom Alliance, we're talking about the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, we're talking about the United National Party, we're talking about the Lanka Tamil Rasa Kachchi, we're talking about the Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, we're talking about Rushad Baduddin's party, we're talking about very forceful political parties in parliament. But we are speaking very little about the JVP. Why is that?
Yeah, well, JVP, I think at the moment is in a transition period, because it's undergoing several reforms within the party, as I understand, and it tries to open up the party for the people, and many elements, many groups, many people are using this space at the moment, and JVP's strength, as I said previously, I feel JVP's strength can't be measured merely with the numbers in parliament or the number of votes that they get in elections. JVP since the beginning, I think, has been a sort of major voice in the country when it comes to the alternative platform of politics, because country at the moment, I think, understand that they requires an alternative political voice, alternative political thinking. So that is the space I think the JVP and other progressive parties in this country should try to fill. So we clearly understand by listening to these educated people, these genuine people here, this country requires an alternative path. So that alternative
But that
path
alternative party is not
has,
the JVP.
has to be negotiated among the people, by the people, and in that process I think JVP provides a very good space. So
Platform,
right? So which other parties actually hardly is able to do that. So JVP's space is very much important, and
But at least now, by now, Dr. Samarakon, don't you think the JP has to at least say a name? Because we see the name of Sajid Premadasa coming into the limelight now. We see the name of Gotabaya Rajapaksa coming into the limelight now. We see same members of the family like Chamal Rajapaksa's name is coming to the limelight now. And we see people like Rohan Pallewata, Naganand Kudituakku, their names are coming to the forefront.
Yeah, many names are there, but
the
names
JVP is like testing the waters. Doesn't it show the political immaturity, as I said before?
So do you think any of these people can
of-
bring any change to the country, any change to the system?
But do you think the JVP can
Sajid
do that
Tosh,
change
can
or bring that
any
change?
other person change the existing system? We don't think. So we need an alternative, which is really an alternative, not just a change of people or new leadership in parties. But we need to think about the policies that this country require at the moment.
But you itself
so
said
in a
before
way
that
we have to clean the system thoroughly, because it is too much corrupt, and on the other hand we need right people in parliament, not only from the JVP, from all other parties, because we are a democracy and we are a multi-party system. We need all the good people to represent these parties. So the political parties, as Mr. Silva rightly says, should think of democracy seriously. So what is endangered, what is jeopardized today is democracy itself. So if democracy is threatened, is in danger, the entire country is in danger. You know,
Thank you very
when
much,
there is
Doctor.
no democratic space in the country, so what really will emerge is authoritarianism or fascism. So that is what we fear. So
but
if
now
the-
people say that we need an authoritative leader.
So I don't think that people say, but the media and the other people try to make a public opinion out of it. So that is one major problem in this country, because people who support these parties, these corrupt parties, I think, so they try to still project them as the saviors of this country. I don't believe in any savior, but people themselves are the saviors. So they have to create their own leaders, and I think they should be wise enough to
And you're
select
saying,
the
Dr.
wise people.
Samarakon, that the phoenix is going to come from the JVP.
No, JVP is a symbol only. So JVP or take any other name, but that name, that party should be able to represent the entire people of this country, their feelings, their real interests. But these major parties, these traditional parties, for long has not been able to represent the people, right? So that is the major issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atul Samarkand, lecturer open University of Colombo. I now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. I will start off the final round with Dr. Atul Samarkand, lecturer open University of Colombo. Dr. Samarkand, let's keep aside the JVP, let's keep aside the UPFA, let's keep aside the major political parties in Sri Lanka, and let's look at objectively to the future. Where do we stand right now? Is there a glimmer of hope for Sri Lanka, at least at the next election, 2020 presidential election? If that's the case, B, who is it going to be and who will have your vote?
No, as a country, I think Sri Lanka is again at crossroads. In 2015, we expected the good governance regime to take this country forward in a correct path, but we saw the government failed and has really failed and lost the faith of the people. So right now, Sri Lanka needs to rethink of its future. And for that to happen, I think there should be a set of people who can really take up the responsibility. So at the moment, looking at the existing political alignments, I would say the traditional parties have really no agenda for themselves. So what we really need is not a particular leader, a particular name, but a particular set of policies and a set of people who can really implement them. So without a clear policy, clear agenda and genuineness and commitment to implement them, the country will not move forward even an inch. So at the moment, Sri Lanka has been a very corrupt country in the world, and Sri Lanka's democracy is declining very fast, and Sri Lanka now is facing a lot of issues in our political system, like issues like ethnic violence, etc., is again rising, right? And as a country, we have failed in many frontiers. So when it comes to social harmony, there is no social harmony in this country. When it comes to good governance, there is no good governance in this country. So when it comes to economic development, so we are nowhere compared to our neighboring country. So everywhere we need reforms. The country needs a lot of reforms. As a state, we have to think of how to reform this political system. So that is where I think we need educated people, those who can take responsibilities, and those who can remain uncorrupt. Actually,
Thank you very
so
much.
we need people who will not become corrupt.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atul Samarkand, lecturer, Open University of Colombo. I now move my attention to Mr. Lassell De Silva, former secretary, Presifac. Mr. De Silva, you've been the former secretary of Presifac. You've been holding the post of director of administration in Parliament for 11 years. Do you think, given your experience, that those who are corrupt will be brought before the book, they will be punished, and Sri Lanka will see a parliament in the future who will really represent the people's aspirations, people's will, people's hope, and the future of this resplendent nation? Do you think that's ever going to happen? or is it just wishful thinking?
I'm really sure that will happen because most of the time.
Don't give up hope.
Yeah, most of the time what happened was they gave promises, right? Like what I said at the very beginning, politicians think that they can always give promises and escape. Unfortunate situation is it has happened in Sri Lanka. Now let me say it this way, this particular juncture, everybody wants a total change and an entire system change. I don't think a new leader who might emerge, because I remember even Andrew Kumar Dissanayake had said, right, they will probably support a person who may come up from the third force, like an alternative group. That was in the papers just a couple of days ago. And I must tell you, we are hard at work, because I have seen I have served 35 years in Parliament. I'm really sad what had happened to this country. We saw a lot of good politicians. It is very unfortunate JVP killed some of our leaders again. LTT killed some of our leaders unsympathetically during the last 30 years. We are short of good leaders, but that does not mean there are good people in the country. There are good leaders who have not been in politics, and people also want people who have not had, political whatever involvements. And we are committed, I must tell you very happily, like what we were there even outstations during the last couple of weeks. I think people want a good change, a realistic change where the culprits will be dealt with. If you don't do that, now see, in order to win the war, there was political will and they won the war, right? Having won the war, if they had the firm resolve, the political will to take the country forward, it would have been one of the greatest opportunities to take the country forward. And even we kept the leaders informed that this is about the best time to take the country forward, stop corruption, stop all that. It didn't happen. Now this government, I mean, at the time of elections, like what I said, they gave all the promises, right? They came back and they have gone even beyond. They have scraped the country mercilessly, and they have ripped off the resources so badly. It is very unfortunate. The people will not depend on anyone. As I feel, when you go out of Colombo, you really feel that it's still in Colombo. It is still worse. They totally reject everybody, right?
Thank you very much, Mr. Silva. I need to leave it at that because we're running out of time. I now move attention to Mr. Kesaril Gunasekara, United People's Freedom Alliance, Devil Mountain Municipal Councillor. Mr. Gunasekara, when Mr. De Silva says there are individuals in the government and in the past regime who are corrupt, majority of them are from the UPFA, unfortunately. And the Presifac was formed, in fact, to bring those responsible to book. How do you feel being now somewhat in limbo as a political party? How do you view your political aspirations in the next couple of years? Who is going to be your presidential candidate? Where does it leave the UPFA now in terms of the future?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer, because I think all parties are going through turmoil. Be it the UMP, be it the SLFP, be it the UPFA, be it the Pudujana Peramuna, all parties, they're all going through turmoil. It's not going to be that easy. As I said earlier, people were expecting a different type of a change. They say the present parties that have ruled this country for 70 odd years are of no use. They're saying it openly. So that gives a different message altogether. As to how that will form itself, I don't know. Because in Sri Lanka, the elections are normally fought through established parties. So far, it's only one party that has come through in a different format and won 1 million votes at an election, at a provincial election. That is the DUNF. Besides the DUNF, I don't think anybody has made an impact to that degree. As to whether somebody else can make an impact is a question. But the social media he has started its campaign. As to to what degree they can mobilize people, I don't know, but they'll play a major role. It's not going to be that easy for anybody. It's not going to be that easy because, as I said before, we assume the candidate from the UPFA or Pudujana Perumna, whomever they have in mind, he has to understand that the former president lost elections because of a particular lot of people, including his own brothers. Let me put it in a very simple manner. Those people are still there. Those people are still there. So whoever becomes the president, if by chance he wins the election, is going to be saddled with the same group. It's not going to be that easy. It's going to be extremely difficult. Now, the UNP also has a different problem. The majority of the people do not want the present leader. That's the thinking. If you ask the average man, they are not interested. So, what is the answer? What is the answer? I represent a party, all right. But for me, country comes first, not the party.
Thank you very much.
Not the party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesala Gunasekara, UPFA, Development Municipal Councillor. Thank you very much, Dr. Atula Samarkon, Lecturer, Open University of Colombo. Thank you very much, Mr. Russell De Silva, former Secretary of Pressify, for joining us this evening on the show. I thank you very much for taking our invitation in the last minute and appearing on the show tonight. Thank you very much from our network as well as from me personally. Thank you very much, Deshan, and thank you very much, Stephanie, for joining us this evening on the show tonight. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Popularity should be no scale for the election of politicians. If it would depend on popularity, Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse would take seats in the Senate. Take care and good night.